and welcome. You're tuned into The Current. My name is Erin Curran, and The Current is a show where we talk about shifting perspective, sparking curiosity, and being in the flow of life. Today, I'm so delighted to welcome on my show Dr. Nicholas Cunningham, Professor Emeritus of Clinical Pediatrics and Public Health at Columbia University. Nicholas,
right.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So viewers will know that on The Current, we like to talk about a whole range of topics. And to begin, I'd love to ask you, what nowadays, because I know you've lived quite a life of travel and working in different populations, different communities. What gives you energy now in your life? What are you kind of passionate about right now, today?
Well, I feel that my role at this point, being somewhat retired, is to bring the things that I've learned from my mentors. I've had extraordinary mentors, to a new audience of younger physicians, health workers of any kind, and just people in general.
Yeah.
And I feel that I've been very lucky in the people that I've encountered who have taught me things, and that their message has, in a way, not gotten through, important as it was. I think they had vital information, understandings, that I don't think have quite reached the policy level so I would like to bring those things forward for a new audience.
So you're talking about things that you've learned through meeting amazing teachers and mentors in your life. Can you give us an example? Is this mostly in the public health arena, or would you say it extends across the spectrum of life?
Well, I think health is at the core of our experience. Our ability to enjoy life, to fulfill ourselves, I think depends on our health.
Right.
Our emotional, our physical, our spiritual health.
Yeah, right. That's the foundation of
Yes.
everything,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, the quality of life plummets as soon as we get sick or have an injury, or certainly if life circumstances aren't suitable to being nurtured and loved as a child. That kind of stays with us as we grow up and become adults.
And how.
And how. And how.
And
So,
as a pediatrician with a child psychiatrist as a life partner, as a wife, I think that what does happen in the first few years really lays the foundation of what's going to happen later. And so
let's get specific with a couple of examples for our viewers, because someone out there watching this may be kind of following us to a certain point. Yes, he's learned things from his mentors, but what specifically do you feel like has been has not been a focus that you would like to see more mainstream, in terms of this early childhood development, in terms of any aspect of health that you think would be better if it were more built into the policy that we use in this country, at least?
Well, I think physicians start out training to take care of individual patients. And being a pediatrician clearly means that you see what you are doing. You hope that it's going to help that child to fulfill themselves, so you're looking towards the future. And that means that I think pediatricians are perhaps more interested than other doctors in the totality of the child's experience, their family life, their school life, everything that happens to them. You see as having this potential for either going in a not good direction or going in a very good direction.
Yeah.
So it leads into public health. And I guess my enthusiasm is to get health workers, physicians, but also nurses, nurse practitioners, community health workers, to function together to get it out of the hospitals, get it out of the specialty areas and out into the community so that every mother and child in the world has a chance to live, to thrive, to go someplace and do something.
What I'm hearing you say is that more interdisciplinary, sort of community-focused networks of support in place for each mother and child, for each family unit, so that they can have that as they develop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that seems like a pretty basic concept, but you don't see that as being in practice today.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it hasn't, I guess for me, the fact that women are coming into their own is offering us a new opportunity to look farther down the road. I think Mary Catherine Bateson, Margaret Mead's daughter, describes men as horses with blinders looking down the road to get someplace, and they don't care what happens on the way. Whereas women are horses or creatures that are constantly looking around and care about what happens today, tomorrow, not just what happens way down. And so they're more civilized. And I think as women get into a greater policy role and a power position, there's an opportunity to take medicine and health out of hospitals and subspecialties and the things that happen when it's too late to really make a very good outcome, and start much earlier and get it out for everybody, so that every mother in the world, every child in the world has that chance. I don't think men have done it. They've failed at that. They get concentrated on their own careers, on their own shtick, and I'm putting myself in that position also. So I think the women that have been my mentors have helped me to look a little bit farther and wider.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the symbol of yin and yang, and how they're complementary. The masculine thinking more of the vertical, and the feminine more of the horizontal. The yin energy is more expansive. The masculine yang is more vertical, and it's they're both needed. But perhaps when it comes to public policy, as you're saying, this broader scope is more beneficial to the masses, than having this is our goal, we're gonna just focus on this and accomplish this one more narrow task. But in unison together, they would be more productive.
I like that image. I never thought of yin and yang that way. I always think of those as those intertwined on a plane.
Yeah.
But taking it into 3 dimensions, I think it's a much better image of yin and yang.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They're definitely, the directionality of yang, the sun energy, very hot, versus the reflective light of the moon, the dark, the night. All of those are the qualities of yin and contrasting with yang. So so that's just one area, and I know you've traveled the world. You've worked quite a bit in Africa, and you've been able to see sort of different communities and how children are raised, and sort of take some of what you see around the world and bring it back here, and notice how we're doing things in this country and maybe how that could be improved. Could you give another example of something you've learned along the way that you think hasn't made it out into the mainstream, that you think is just so vital and that you'd like to see?
Well, one example is when I was working in Togo in West Africa, I worked with a midwife who had a baby. She had the baby on her back, and she was delivering other women's babies with her own baby on her back.
Wow.
And that was an example of how women in West Africa they sleep with their babies, they carry their babies every place. And one of the nurses that worked with me got that idea, and she liked it. She wanted her baby to continue it's sort of the continuum concept. The baby starts out inside you, and then instead of coming out and being put aside, it stays with you to listen to your heartbeat, hear your speech, feel the rhythms and putting the baby on the back or on the front. That woman wanted to do that, and so she came back and invented the Snuggly. And that's how soft baby carriers came from the Peace Corps, West Africa, to the United States.
Yeah.
And that was a lovely idea, I think, that needs much wider circulation.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes it, when you think about from the baby's perspective, it makes it such a less drastic and jarring transition, because you're still with the mother. You know, you're still on the body, and like you said, hearing the heartbeat and being in the rhythms of the movement of the body and everything, compared to this, like, you know, structure that...
One of the things you learn in physiology in medical schools is that sudden changes in any important element in the body, in the human organism, are not healthy. If your sodium suddenly drops, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, and when I was in college, I was more of a revolutionary, but now I think I'm an evolutionary. I like a more gradual change.
Yeah.
And that's something that certainly applies to mother-child and the child in the family. Sudden change, it's hard for the organism to adjust to.
Right.
And revolution has such terrible consequences.
Right.
On the other hand, if you don't move at all, that's bad. So
Right.
somewhere in between.
Finding that balance, gradually building up to more movement, or gradually building up to more independence in the case of the mother-child.
Yes.
Yeah, I like
Well,
that.
Eric Fromm wrote a book years ago called The Art of Loving. And of course he oversimplified, as you do when you write a popularizing book. But he said the mother gives unstinting, unconditional love, but the father's job is to come and introduce the child to reality. When you go out in the world, you're not going to get unstinting, unconditional love. It's going to be conditional. The father introduces the conditional, the real world sort of idea. And so the child has to believe in themselves. That they get from the mother. And of course, today we realize that these roles of mother and father can be changed. Sometimes the father takes the mother's role, sometimes the mother takes the father, but those two elements are needed at different stages. And the thing I love about pediatrics is that it teaches you that a human organism is changing all the time. And so what's good for a 3-month-old is not good for a 13-month-old, and vice versa. And a lot of misunderstanding in parents is they expect the child, they think that the child will be more independent if you got to learn that now.
Right,
and
right.
It's too soon. The child is not ready to learn it. And the frustration between the child who wants to learn it and please the mother, but is not ready developmentally. That's a
Right.
lot of problems.
Yeah, that causes a lot of tension and friction in the family. And yeah, there's so much to talk about. And I talked a little bit with a previous guest, Sarah McLaughlin, on parenting and parenting and having more success with that struggle, that what can be a battle of wills, it can feel like. And she gave some tips. So I would encourage viewers to watch that episode to talk more about that with Sarah. But coming back to you, I wanted, we've sort of delved right into your professional, the mentors you've had and what you're passionate about in the field of public health and certainly child and maternal health. I wonder, some of these things that we're talking about, you said when you were younger, you were more of a revolutionary, and now you consider yourself more of an evolutionary. Are there other ways outside of maybe your work that you've softened in that same regard, or have greater compassion or greater patience or acceptance that you would say that you might be willing to share with our viewers?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
My mother believed in fairness, and since I was a 5th child, I believed in fairness because my older siblings were more capable. I can remember when we all took piano lessons, and when I was trying to play the piano, it was easy for an older child who'd played that same piece to come and rattle it off. And my mother said, when they start to do that, you say loudly, "That's my tune. Don't play my tune." And I remembered that.
Yeah.
And of course, that idea of fairness, because of course they could play them much better, but it would be discouraging for the child. So don't play my tune. I'm going to do it at the way I can, the best I can right now, and don't discourage me.
Yeah.
So
Give me space to play and learn on my own.
So fairness has meant a great deal to me.
Yeah.
And as the youngest, smallest, I wanted fairness to give me a chance to develop. And so I see fairness today in the inequality of maternal and child care. That's what I just can't stand. I want every mother and every child to have a chance. And that means taking medicine out of the office, getting it out into the community.
Right.
It's what we call primary care. That means a lot of different things. It can mean first contact care, but what it means to me is the care that every mother and child has a right to, the basics, the basics.
Yeah.
And I also believe strongly in integration. And I think that the integration, let me give you an example. If a midwife takes a mother successfully through childbirth, which in West Africa, the death rate is 80 times what it is in the United States. So it's 80 times more dangerous to have a baby. And that's true in Southeast Asia, it's true in many, many parts of the world, and in less developed part of our own world here. So if the midwife can take a mother through that scary thing successfully, trust is developed. That trust should not be wasted. And then when the mother has a small baby and now is worried about this and that, who's she going to go to? She's not going to go, I hope, to a computer or to a doctor who is not interested in her questions. She goes back to the midwife who took her back through. So integrating maternal and child care is the first level of integration. The second level is uniting curative with preventive. When you have a sore throat or a high temperature or something that's scary, for a child, the mother is terribly worried. Is it going to become pneumonia or something?
Right.
So when she brings her child to any practitioner, whether it's a nurse practitioner or a doctor, whoever, midwife, and that's taken care of, then when that person says, you know, you'd be better off spacing your children, not having another baby right away, the mother may not inherently believe that. Her husband is pressing her. We want more children. You know, let's have the children. Or the mother herself wants to get back to her professional life, wants to have the children quickly to get. But if she trusts the woman or the practitioner who's taken her through a life-threatening illness, then she will, on basis of that trust, she will go ahead and plan her children. So that's another integration. So as somebody who's been interested in civil rights, that's integration. But this is an aspect of integration in health that I think makes the whole thing work much better. Well, continuity of care.
Continuity of care and building trust and using the trust that's created naturally through these life-changing events, these huge events that people are then there for each other and not just saying, okay, well then that's over and then here's a new person and here's a new person and this person's not available, so here's a new person and there's no continuity.
I think it probably applies to education.
Yeah.
You believe partly because your rational mind, it makes sense to you. But it also you believe because the person with whom you're engaging, you like and trust and respect. And if therefore you can take that extra leap where your own reason doesn't take you that far, you'll say, well, all right, if you believe that and I know you're a trustworthy person, I'm going to go along with that. So,
yeah. And again, I think that comes back to, this idea of community, which I'd like to segue into and thinking about communities and how we find community, how we cultivate community, what communities have been there to support us. You started off by talking about your mentors and the incredible teachers that you were lucky enough to be paired with and learn from. And I wonder, in your long life, if you've noticed or if you have anything that you'd like to say about what nourishes community and how you have found your place in community and what communities you value sort of you see where I'm going with this? It's a broad question, but it's something I like to talk about on this show, because I think in this day and age, there's so much isolationism that happens, buoyed by all of our tech and cars, and it's just so easy to be alone at home, and to go through a day and not really have a lot of interactions with other people. And so I wonder for you, like what this idea of community brings up.
To me, it brings up the fact that to be a good doctor, you have to listen. You have to listen. One of my favorite mentors at Johns Hopkins, where I went to medical school, was asked by a medical student, how much, where you're confronting a child or a person in a family who's got a fatal illness and they're going to die, how much do you tell them about it? And he said, tell the patient exactly as much as they want to know, no more, no less. And I thought about that, and to me it means you have to listen to that patient. You have to listen and understand and be them in a way before you can really rightly advise them. So listening to a community. When I started working in Manhattan, in a needy community part of Manhattan, I was looking for an agency that could speak for that community. And this was in northern Manhattan, and at first I didn't find any. There didn't seem to be any social service agency who spoke for the community. I finally found one, and in the end I was deceived that the person who was speaking for the community was actually a man who was very politically ambitious, and he might have started out speaking for that community, but he was now speaking more for his, And then I came across the Dominican Women's Organization, and they actually were more in touch with that community. Because if you wanted to set up a program, you don't want to set it up in a paternalistic way. This is what we know is good for you.
Right, right.
But we want to have a partnership. We want to have a dialogue and then a partnership. But you have to have a partner.
Right.
So listening to a community to find out who speaks for that community.
Right.
In West Africa, we would look to the religious leaders. We would look to the chief of the village or the quartier or whatever it is, and try to form a health committee that, first of all, includes women, and that's very important.
Right.
And doesn't happen naturally. One of my heroines in Nigeria was the mother of my best friend, who was the first pediatric professor in Nigeria. His mother was famous for having, as the president of the Market Association, de-stooled the Oba of Abeokuta. This was a traditional chief who was corrupt, and he was inefficient, and he wasn't doing the job.
So when you say de-stooled, it's dethroned? Almost
taken off his stool. That's what they call it.
Right, right.
It has a slightly different understanding in this.
Well, we're talking about
English.
Pediatrics, and just want to keep us all on the same page.
I can see that be misunderstood. I'm just saying it the way they say it.
Right.
She's known as the mother who de-stooled this Oba.
Yeah, yeah.
And she took her market women, occupied his space, and he realized that she had the whole community behind her.
Yeah.
So that was an example of women's power to make a change.
Yeah.
And so I really, that lady was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And she's not the only lady extraordinary that I met in West. I met many extraordinary women. Women from rural villages who were able to do amazing things.
Yeah. So the community element, coming back to that, is, you started out by talking about listening.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in your own life, where you feel most connected, where you feel this these communities, whether it's smaller groups of friends that you cultivate through shared interests or passions, or your colleagues, or just a number of different communities. I guess it could be the community. I guess we all have a number of different kinds of communities depending on what it is we're engaged in.
Well, speaking very personally, I love to play tennis. So I have a community, a small community of tennis playing older men like me. I'm 91, older men who play tennis once a week.
Yeah.
And then we go off to a cafeteria, and then we talk about all the things that our wives don't like to talk about: politics, sex, religion, etc. And then I have another community. I love playing chamber music. Mm-hmm. So there again, after we play a quartet or a quintet, we go and drink some wine and chat, and so that gives me an awareness of what those people, who are completely different people, what their lives are like.
Yeah.
And so you have all these avenues of openings that you can see a different community.
Yeah, and be part of, and it opens up different parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to if one doesn't have those kinds of interests or engaging activities, to go out and actively seek them out, to take a class, to try a new activity, to go to a show and meet some new people, and just put your toe in and test the waters and see if you like it. It may be something that you end up having a love for, like astronomy, becoming an amateur astronomer and joining that community. There's just so many different areas of potential interest when we're curious.
True.
And I think
but my problem is that I'm rather interested in too many things. And just as I've collected many objects and books and music and all kinds of stuff, so I have a tendency to get completely preoccupied with my fascination with this or that or the other thing. Slavery, because my ancestors were made fortunes in cotton, I'm very interested in slave cotton and the fact that that the family fortune, if you will, was built on the backs of slaves.
Yeah.
So that's a whole area of interest. And one of my relatives is named Amos Lawrence. He's the violinist, but he changed his name to be like this ancestor who founded Lawrence, Mass, and Lawrence, Kansas, and did all these things, and who really was the originator of the family fortune, if you will. I'm a legacy admission to Harvard. I've gotten so many benefits from the wealth of my ancestors who've enabled me to, my family was into music and all these things, which are things that many hardworking people don't have time to really do.
Right, or the early exposure. You talked about piano lessons earlier. Those sorts of things that we can take for granted when we have means and are exposed to them.
Exactly. And these things are passed along. My father played the cello. I play the cello. My son plays the cello. And we're playing the same. He's playing the same cello that my father played in 1890. So it's intergenerational. My wife is a psychiatrist. She likes to talk. She doesn't like to, but she talks about the intergenerational transmission of trauma. But there's also the intergenerational transmission of love and the arts and all these things.
It's a mixed bag, as they say, right? Baggage that comes through.
So we're getting back to the question of interest. At 91, the day is too short. I don't have time to do all the things. I mean, even when I was working, it seemed to me I had more time. Now, I can't catch up with all the things I'm trying to do. And so I'm spread rather thin, unfortunately.
I think we'll come back, and I'll put a link in the notes to this show to that article, the series of articles that we talked about prior to the show that the New York Times has been running.
1619.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So viewers, if they're interested in learning more about that and
Yeah.
what's just all the wealth of research that has been able to be uncovered and then consolidated for the reader in that, and really getting a sense, like you said, of just how everything that this country was built on was
It's
slave
a
labor.
fantastic thing to think that so many of our early presidents were slave owners.
Yeah.
And we knew this, and it was in the history books, but we didn't know it in the
Right.
sense of understanding what it really meant.
What that meant day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this series in the New York Times about a month ago, about 1619, shows how it was built. The whole nation's economy is built on this cheap labor, and that's why we were successful.
Yeah, it's a topic for a whole other show, which I think I will do with a friend of mine who's interested in the topic too. So we'll maybe use this opportunity. We've been sitting a while. I don't know if you feel it in kind of this need to get up and maybe stretch or move a little bit. I always feel that way after maybe 20 minutes or a half hour. If I'm sitting somewhere, I just begin to feel like, oh, I got to shift, and maybe our viewers at home are feeling that way.
You've never been stiff the way I am.
Well, we're gonna work on that right now by doing what we always do on the show here, which is taking a little NIA movement break. So I am going to give you a stack of cards. I teach a movement class called the NIA technique, and there are 52 moves in this class. In this movement vocabulary, I should say, and we have 52 cards. And so we've taped a number of shows, we've done some of the moves, so if you pick a card that we've already done, we'll pick another one. And so just pick a card at random and we'll see what you get.
Okay.
Let's see what that one is. Oh, no, we haven't done this one yet. What does it say? Just the letters.
Toes in, out, parallel.
Perfect. So I'm going to read what it says, and then we'll do it together. And I invite viewers at home to stand up, stretch. It feels so good to get up and stretch. And we'll all do this together. So toes in, out, parallel is actually one move. So we sort of sneak a lot of moves into one sometimes. So in this move, you point your toes in different directions. First, place your feet parallel to each other. And sometimes it's good to actually look down at your feet. Imagine that they're on two railroad tracks. Then turn them in as if you are pigeon-toed. And when you do that, you can sort of sense, especially if you place your hands up by the ball and socket hip joints, you can feel, just turning from parallel to in, you can feel maybe a little bit of that rotation there in the hip joint.
I feel it in my knees.
There you go. All right, so we'll turn them in as if pigeon-toed, then turn them out or away from each other. And again, you can keep your hand there and feel that rotation. Practice walking, pointing your toes in each direction. Imagine your feet as windshield wipers and firmly sound in, out, parallel to increase your mindfulness. In, out, parallel. And so I like to, once you get a hang of it, I like to encourage students to look out and keep their eyes up and out, in, parallel, and to get a sense of where are my toes pointing even when I'm not looking at them. So do I have a sense of knowing the direction my toes are going, my feet, the direction I'm pointing, even when I'm not looking at them? This move improves hip mobility and stability, which in turn improves power, speed, and reflex responses of the legs. And some of the benefits of toes in, out, parallel are it improves the mobility in your ankle, knee, and hip joints, making locomotion more comfortable and dynamic. And you're doing it when we're on a rug here, so we've got our shoes rubbing against the rug. You can absolutely do it this way, or, Nicholas, we can do it together with the right foot. Out, in, parallel. We can go out and in. And that's when I really feel that ball and socket hip joint rolling around up there in that area. I can feel the mobility of my thigh bone, the largest bone in the body, the femur, moving different directions, toes in, toes out, parallel. And just playing with this. You can do this. You can do this. You're standing in line in the grocery store, and you can add palm directions and really start to boogie down in the grocery store or waiting in any line, maybe the Department of Motor Vehicles. So thank you for being game with with toes in, out, parallel. Thank you, viewers, for participating. And we'll have a seat. Thanks for doing that. It's one of the benefits of the NIA technique is all this movement variety. You know, movement variety. There are 52 different moves, so we move everything as the body's designed to move.
Now, Fred Astaire could do all that and keep his head absolutely in the same place. Does Nia tell you to keep your head in the same place, or your head's supposed to move with your body?
That's a great question, and I'd invite you to have a seat if you'd like. We do actually have another move that is head and eye movements. So I think sometimes there's a benefit to keeping your head and your eyes looking in one direction and doing things, but there's also a tremendous benefit to moving the head and eyes and engaging the cervical spine, and also really moving the fluid of our inner ear to play with balance and really help us, you know, use and get used to moving the head in different ways so that we can practice stability in dynamic relationship and not fall down. Or if we do fall down, get ourselves back up, right? Dee's really good at that. Toes in, out, parallel. I'm not sure Dee is, I'm not sure the dog is designed quite as well for that movement, but she's got sort of a natural toes out stance, don't you? And I think that's really interesting too, to notice the body's own, you know, there's the body's way, the design of the body, and then there's my body's way and your body's way. And noticing how our bodies differ and how maybe some of us walk more with our toes in or toes out, and it may be easier for some person to have a really wide range of movement based on their hip mobility and the design, or a smaller range, and just honoring your body's way, you know, while following the body's way, as we say in NIA. So I'll put a link to learn more about NIA in the notes as well. Thanks for doing that little movement break with me.
I haven't heard anybody talk about the fluid of the inner ear recently. That caught my attention because I wonder, as we get older, we tend to be not quite as stable. There's a little bit of doubt that enters. When you're 91, you begin to feel sometimes if you do it too fast, it goes back to what we were saying about doing things suddenly.
Revolutionary versus evolutionary.
You have to sort of do it a little more deliberately and with awareness.
Yeah.
Because I think the fluid in the middle of the ear, maybe those hairs don't respond quite as well, or I'm not sure what it is, but you don't have quite the stability that you have. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also, it just how often do you do it? You know, like anything, are you in practice with moving your head all around? Are you used to turning around? And I've had NIA students who, when they start out taking NIA with me, say, oh, the turn is too much, and they do a lateral travel, or they just don't do, they do something else to circle, which is great. There are always modifications. But the same student, a year later, is turning and returning and feels like so much more stable because she's slowly been able to incorporate those movements. So I think when we slowly introduce something new and then practice it on a regular basis, we do get more proficient, obviously, and more at ease doing it.
When we were hunter-gatherers, we probably did a lot of those things as part of our hunter-gathering.
Yeah. I tell you, I was just out hiking and not on a sidewalk or a graded, surface, and the amount of problem solving that happens just walking down a path with boulders and roots and, just problem solving where the next step is, split second. I mean, I called it problem solving because it really struck me in the moment that that's what I'm doing. Where am I putting my next foot? Where am I putting my foot? And all of that is taken out of the equation when we're walking down a sidewalk or certainly driving in a car, right? There's just none of that stimulation that we have when we're walking on a trail in the woods.
Absolutely.
It fascinates me. And so we have techniques like the NIA technique that allows us to bring in a movement variety in ways that we don't experience in this built environment that we've created for ourselves. So artificial in some ways from how the body's designed to move, like you said. Yeah, as hunter-gatherers, we were doing all these 52 moves and then some, right? Anyway, I'd like to come back and ask you a question, because part of the current, what we talk about on this show, is life change and being in the flow of life. And what we've learned, what you've learned living your life and going through tremendous changes, some very personal, others maybe professional, some planned changes, some completely unexpected, natural disasters or others such that just boom, come out of the blue. And we have to then adapt and go with the flow. I wonder if there's any life change that you'd be willing to share with viewers that you can think, really prompted maybe a question or prompted you to change something about how you were living that you'd care to share.
Well, I think like many physicians, I was sick as a child. And because as a young child, I was in the pre-antibiotic age. Every time you got a cold, your mother, if she could afford to, would put you to bed, take you out of school, put you to bed for a few days for fear that you'd develop pneumonia. And of course, in 1918, the biggest pandemic ever, the flu killed so many people. So having come out of that, I was born in 1928, so 10 years after that. One of the things that happened, however, was that Lindbergh's baby, Charles Lindbergh is one of the most famous men in the United States at that time. Somebody came up into the nursery where his little 1-year-old or 2-year-old child was, abducted that child, and ultimately demanded ransom and then killed that child. Well, this is in all the newspapers.
Right.
And so I heard about that at some level, and I became fearful. I was scared of the dark for years. I would jump from a yard to get into the bed so that a monster wouldn't reach out and grab me.
I bet a lot of people can relate to being.
And I had a series of questions. Before I could go to sleep, I'm not sure whether it was the illness that I'd had, which was a retropharyngeal abscess, which I almost died, or whether it was this Lindbergh's baby, but I was fearful.
Yeah.
And I would insist on asking my mother a whole series, I think 10 or 12 questions. Every night, the same questions. Will I be too hot? Will I be too cold? Will I think of horrid things?
Oh.
Will a bad man come? Will a robber come? And if a robber comes, will Daddy poke him with a screwdriver? That was one of my questions. And
the ultimate defense.
And my mother would patiently answer these questions, never showed signs of irritation or impatience, and got me through it.
Yeah, so that you would settle down and go to sleep.
And very interestingly, I found out recently that Morris Sendak, who is 2 months older than I am, went through the same thing about the Lindbergh baby.
Wow.
And incorporated that. Part of where the wild things are was sort of stimulated by his early experience with that.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
So that's a little, I mean, I always loved Sendak, but now I have something really in common.
In common with him,
Yeah.
So this question about life change, you remember that illness as an early pivotal moment.
And one of my nurses gave me a monkey, about a toy monkey about that. And my mother not only accepted that for me, she made a suit of clothes for that monkey. And we debated, should there be a hole for the tail or not? Because this monkey lived among men. And would he be better off if his tail was amputated? I mean, I don't know whether this has something to do with none of my brothers or I were circumcised, but this monkey did have his tail. So she closed up the hole that she left in the suit of clothes when he no longer had a tail. And this monkey, in my mind, went to Africa and interrupted a huge epidemic among monkeys.
So this monkey, you had a whole story that you told about.
I said he was Dr. Monkey White.
Monkey.
Yes.
Dr. Monkey White.
Dr. Monkey White. And he's still there in my mother's house at the head of the stairs, still presiding there. And so I think that the pediatrician I had was wonderful. The nurses were wonderful. The positive aura of these health workers who were saving me made a big impression.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure there's a whole dissection we could do on Dr. Monkey White, but I think we'll leave that for the viewer to have fun with at home. So we're getting near. We're not completely at the end of our time, but I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you about.
Yes.
Yeah. How'd I know?
Paul Farmer has gotten a lot of justifiably. He's a professor at Harvard who's written about bringing our health to people who don't have it in Central America and other places.
Yeah.
I disagree with him because it seems to me that he's pretty much doctor hospital oriented. I'm frustrated by the fact that in our wonderful efforts to provide humanitarian relief and aid for specific diseases like AIDS, we have lost sight of the fact that the foundation of health is every child needs to have a nurse practitioner or a midwife or a doctor or somebody, basic community health worker, to provide immunizations, care when they're sick, and basic what I call primary care.
Yeah.
If every child had that, and if every mother could be assured of getting through pregnancy safely, that would be the basis of health.
Right,
and we're so preoccupied with things. Some American doctors said, why teach them what we know? Well, we know a great deal, but we also have a foundation of public health, which is not present in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So until such time as the women are educated and able to provide more care themselves, or community health workers are out, we need to provide the basic things, not the fancy care, not the high-cost, expensive stuff, or relief. We need to continue to do relief work, yes. When there's a disaster, yes, help. But there will always be problems for mothers and children, and we need to go out and do. It's less dramatic, but more effective to go out and do that work. And we could do it. It's low cost. It could be done. And in doing it, we would be promoting education for all women and girls and primary care for everybody. That's the message that I want to bring.
Yeah, and so basically what I'm hearing is that what gets the funding and the headlines and the splashy grants and everyone excited
and the deanships and the Nobel Prizes
and are targeted. We're kind of back to the Yang targeted. Let's target this disease, or let's target this deformity, or
it needs to be part of community development. And community development really means women's development. And that's so it's actually a very revolutionary concept, because in most societies, women are down there and men are up there. So it means giving women their due, and then they will then do much of what needs to be done.
And like you said, there's not, I think one of the reasons that we're so trained to have, okay, what's the goal? We're gonna go for this, and then we're gonna achieve it, and then we're gonna be done with it. But we've learned, whether it's in foreign policy and war or healthcare practices, when we go after a specific thing without an understanding of the broader context, we create more chaos than provide health and help.
Just as a child is a growing organism, a community is a growing organism. And until primary care and primary education is available to all children and all women, and then out of that you can then produce health care, and it's built from the bottom up, not this, we know, we have the answers, we're going to tell you what to do.
What action steps, if the viewer is listening to you and thinking, oh, I like what he's saying, but maybe I'd like more information, or how do I go about asking for this from what kind of action steps might you suggest?
I think two things. First of all, know who's doing the good work. Charity Navigator tells you which of the NGOs, which of the non-governmental organizations and voluntary organizations are doing the good work, which are the ones that pay like $750,000 to their CEO and not a reasonable salary.
So is Charity Navigator a website that people can visit?
Yes, and it's an organization. You can give to Charity Navigator, and you will get every year a pamphlet that tells you, is it Oxfam you want to give to? Is it Save the Children? Is it Planned Parenthood? Who's doing the good work? And who is putting almost all their money into what they do, not just saving money.
We'll put a link to Charity Navigator under the notes.
And
what
the
else?
second thing is tithing. In the old days, people tithed for their church. We need these things require, it's not just a one deal, it's not one and done. No. Every year we need to be building and tithing, taking whatever you can afford, 5, 10, 15%. I think in the old days the churches thought of it as 12%. In proportion to what you can afford. What is your wealth? What is your salary? Tithe. But tithe intelligently, working with organizations that are doing the basic stuff and not just the dramatic life-saving in terms of, of an emergency. That would make it, those two things, which organization to work with, which partners, which people are really, which organizations are working with communities to build them up rather than just telling them what to do, etc. That would, and tithing, so that every year you give a certain proportion. That would make a big difference.
And I wonder if there's any, just in terms of lifestyle or things you've learned over the years, you know, ways of being in the world that have shifted for you over the years, things that you do now that you never used to do, or things you used to do that you don't do now. You know, ways that you've evolved. You've called yourself an evolutionary. That might inspire the viewers to maybe question their own choice, and if not make a similar choice, at least question it, and maybe be curious about someone else's perspective on the matter, whether it's recycling or you know, how you commute, or what choices you make in terms of your political activism. Is there anything else that you'd like to add along those lines?
The main thing I've learned is that I can't do it alone. I'm constantly reminded of the fact that anything that I do is because I've been doing it in the context of my wife, or my children, or my family, or my colleagues, or it's always togetherness. And so being aware of that. One of my sons is presently unattached, and I worry because he seems to think that he can be satisfied and happy just sort of going it alone. And I've never been able to do that, but ever more am I aware of my limitations. And I go to church so that I will be reminded of my hubris and my arrogance, and be more humble and more willing to listen to others and not just think I know the answers. Because of course inside I think I do know the answers. But I've got to control that and realize that really I don't.
What a beautiful point to end on. It's something that we seem to touch on in virtually every show, that there's a common thread of, you know, it's an illusion, this idea that we're separate bodies doing our own thing, disconnected and independent, and that we really are completely just totally immersed in a cooperative network of interbeingness, if you will, and that this is our whole species, and all living matter on the planet is connected in that way. So I'd love to end on that note, if you'd agree to that, and really thank you for making the time, being here in Maine. I know that you're usually in New York.
In and of itself.
It's important to compliment the host.
Wait, no, your
final word.
Your emphasis on movement, that is important, because we do get stiff with age. So you are an inspiration for me to get out and move around.
Good. Well, I'm glad we were able to do this show together. Nicholas, thank you again. And thank you, viewers at home, for tuning into The Current. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.